But first, here's my take. The best illustration of the incoherence of the Trump administration's strategy toward Iran came last week in a White House press release. It read, "There is little doubt that even before the deal's existence, Iran was violating its terms." The White House has not subsequently explained how a country can violate the terms of a deal before that deal existed. This is not the only example of incoherence. When Donald Trump announced last month that he had called off military strikes against Iran, he said it was because he learned that an estimated 150 Iranians would have died. Instead, he further tightened economic sanctions against Iran. The sanctions being levied against Iran are having a massive and crippling effect on the country, says Jeffrey Sachs, an economist who has studied the effects of such measures. He notes sanctions like these are known to cause a significant rise in mortality. Given the size of Iran's population, around 81 million, this is sure to be far larger than 150 deaths. And keep in mind, the people who would have died in the military strikes likely would have been Iranian soldiers. Those who are now dying because of sanctions are newborn babies, mothers, the elderly, and sick. The Trump administration has created a humanitarian crisis in Iran and a geopolitical crisis in the Middle East with no strategy to resolve either. The Iran Pact had forced Tehran to commit that it would never develop nuclear weapons, ship away 98% of its enriched uranium, destroy its plutonium reactor, and agree to limits and intrusive inspections for between 10 and 25 years. The international inspectors confirmed that Iran was adhering to the deal. By withdrawing from the pact, the Trump administration has allowed Iran to start moving away from those limits. For example, Tehran had agreed that it would only develop 300 kilograms of low-enriched uranium until 2030. Last week, Iran exceeded that limit, justifying its move by pointing out that the United States had itself abrogated the pact. U.S. actions toward Iran have also created a rift within the Western alliance. The Europeans are in open revolt against Washington's unilateralism and have even made efforts to establish an alternative payment mechanism to the dollar for trade with Iran. As the noose tightens around Iran, it has been reacting with incremental actions by its own military, or more often by associated militias, from Yemen to the Persian Gulf. Each of these actions then produces a reaction from the United States or Saudi Arabia. In other words, Trump has sharply ratcheted up regional tensions with no good plan to resolve them. The Trump administration is hoping for capitulation from the Iranians, in which they will return to the negotiating table and accept a deal far more onerous than the one they signed in 2015. It's possible this will happen, but far more likely that this regional Cold War gets worse and worse. Even if there were some kind of temporary Iranian concessions born out of desperation, they will surely not last. Wounded, embittered powers always find a way to return with a vengeance. The Trump administration seems to forget that the Iranian civilization has been a major player in the Middle East for thousands of years. It has a strong tradition of nationalism and statecraft and a history of resisting foreign domination. The path to stability in the Middle East does not lie in strangling Iran. That will only sow the seeds of resentment and revanchism, creating a more unstable region and one in which the United States will find itself mired for decades. Alas, this is the path on which we find ourselves moving. For more, go to cnn.com/Fareed and read my Washington Post column this week. And let's get started. Let's keep talking about Iran and the future of the nuclear deal with one of America's top negotiators of that deal. Ernest Moniz was brought into the talks because he was the energy secretary at the time and a nuclear physicist, once head of MIT's physics department. Secretary Moniz, pleasure to have you on.
Thanks, Fareed. Pleasure to be back.
It seems to me that the Iranians are engaging in kind of almost staged violations of the deal. Not even violations; they're sort of abrogating in ways that they're signaling that are sort of they claim permitted under the deal. What is the goal of these small steps that they are taking?
I think it's very much as you say. They certainly are not showing any evidence and do not want to project that they are going after a nuclear weapon. But what they are saying is that they are not getting the benefits of the agreement after the United States pulled out and then really ramped up what are called secondary sanctions, dramatically cut off their oil revenues. And so they are making a signal very, very clearly, I would say especially to the Europeans, that they need some solution to the economic benefits that they are being deprived of, and they will continue to ratchet up without causing, in some sense, a panic that they are pursuing a nuclear weapon, but making the case quite clearly that something needs to be done. I might add, I think it is very important to remember that the agreement, the JCPOA, has built into it a minimum of 1 year for Iran to assemble the material for a nuclear weapon, no matter what they do. If they go full out, even make no attempt to disguise it, it would still take them a year. So again, we have to put these, so far, small violations in a technical sense in perspective, without diminishing the fact that they are, in fact, violations of some of the key parameters of the agreement.
The big deal would be if they were to get rid of the inspectors and the cameras, because the deal has this very intrusive inspection process, dozens of inspectors at every site from the uranium mines to the labs, to the production facilities. Is there any sign that they're trying to dismantle that inspection regime?
Well, so far not. And Fareed, I think you've hit the nail on the head. Frankly, it's not emphasized enough that, in my view, and I've said this many times, the most important part of the agreement is, in fact, the verification measures that are unique to Iran, much tougher than any other country is subject to. First of all, that's an indication that we actually had a broad spectrum of major powers, the United States, the European countries, Russia, and China, all taking note of the fact that Iran did have a structured nuclear weapons program through 2003, and therefore the agreement is not built upon trust. The agreement is built upon, as you say, very intrusive and very unique inspection measures.
The Trump administration seems to be hoping that all this pressure will bring the Iranians back to the negotiating table and negotiate an even tougher deal. Longer time periods, include ballistic missiles, etc. You spent a long time negotiating with the Iranians. What is the likely prospect of that?
I think right now it's not very likely unless there is a much more creative proposal that provides benefits on both sides. And one reason of it is, quite frankly, look, we all know the Supreme Leader obviously approved the agreement, but in doing so, he was consistently saying publicly, you really can't trust the Americans. Well, the U.S. pulled out, and that certainly did nothing but reinforce his argument. It's going to be very, very hard, I think, for these two leaders to come back together with a serious negotiation. We hope that can happen, but the conditions are certainly not ideal, to put it mildly.
So the Trump administration, as you say, has ratcheted up the pressure tremendously. The Iranians are responding in various ways. Does it worry you that this kind of escalation spiral, without a clear, exit strategy, without a clear ramp that people can take, could lead to miscalculations?
Absolutely. I am, frankly, terrified of that possibility. I do believe that ultimately both the Iranian government and our administration and our military do not want a major military confrontation. But as you say, once you start getting into tit for tat, and the tits and the tats are in fact often asymmetric, like there could be a military strike versus cyber responses versus across the Middle East, activities by Iranian proxies against American assets and American personnel. This has every possibility of going out of control.
Ernest Moniz, always a pleasure to have you on.
Thank you, Fareed.